pleasure to be here with so many writers and book lovers. On the way here today, I stopped in at the Well-Read Moose to pick up some books that they had of mine that they hadn't sold a copy in 2 years. And that's pretty daunting when you think about 20, 30 years ago. Right now, I mean, I've seen some stunning figures where selling hard copy books, I mean, it's just not, you're not selling a lot of them anymore. Get your books out on ebook and get your books out on Audible too. I mean, especially if you have nonfiction, you can rent a studio, find out what the requirements are, and go to ACX. That's the Audible, the Amazon company. That's don't breathe heavily into the microphone. Let me tell you a little bit about myself, so you know what my credentials are, so to speak, for this. I have 2 master's degrees in writing. One from creative writing from Colorado State University, one from University of Southern California, Masters of Professional Writing. And one of the seminars I took there was from a guy named Julius Epstein. I don't know whether that name's familiar to you or not, but he was a screenwriter from Casablanca. So that was a little while ago. I've taught literature and writing. I taught IB English. I don't know whether you're familiar with what that is. I taught AP English as well, and I taught these in international schools. I taught it on the slopes of Mount Kilimanjaro in Tanzania and in the highlands of Indonesia as well. Yeah, I taught Shakespeare, Jane Austen, Homer, Little Women, and all these books. And so one of the things I'm going to promise you today is that I'm going to tell you what you need to read to really improve your writing. And we've all read these how-to books, how to do this and how to do that in writing. But there's one thing you need to be reading. Anybody have any guess what that is?
Dictionary. The classics?
Classics is a good guess. I mean, that's on the right track, so to speak. What it is if you're writing a certain type of fiction or nonfiction, you have to be reading those books. I write fiction. And so if I want to, learn about how to get tension into my books, I'll read a book like The One Man by Andrew Gross. There's so much tension in that book, you have to shut the book and run outside the house, something like that. There's a lot of tension in it. So you're impressed as a reader, you really feel it, but as a writer, you want to look and see how he does that. What did he do that was so darn scary? And it wasn't a horror fiction. The One Man is about trying to rescue this scientist who's a prisoner at Auschwitz. And so that's where all the tension comes from. What about a character? You really like this character. This character has you fascinated, wants to keep you reading. Well, as a reader, that's great. But as a writer, how does the writer do that? How does the author do that? Go back and look at it, find out what that writer has done. So what I'm going to talk today about a little bit for a few minutes is character development, plot development, time travel, historical novels, and research. I'm going to try to mix all those up together. So I found when I'm teaching, and I found when I was younger and I'm reading all these how to write books, that when you get a book that's 200-300 pages and telling you to do this, to do this, to do this, about 500 things that you're supposed to do, you're just not going to remember. It's not even going to go into muscle memory. So that when I talk about character development, I only talk about 2 or 3, I'll say 4 or 5 of the most important things that I think you can do to improve the characters and the plot. Why do I mention time travel and historical novels? This is about how you can use time travel if you're writing time travel, which I do occasionally, and historical novels, which I do occasionally, is you can use these to create not only character, but also plot. And really helpful in creating plot. So the difference between a time slip novel and a time travel novel, you've probably heard both those terms. Anybody have any idea what the difference is between those two terms?
Say the two terms again.
Time slip novel and a time travel novel.
I'm guessing one would be accidental.
There you go. One is accidental. And that's what, in my novels, that's what I use. When you're talking about accidental, you're talking about Outlander. You're all familiar with Outlander. So it really gives you a scene that you have to write and a bunch of scenes that you have to write. You have to think about, and the scene is almost there to write itself, because the character in a time slip novel doesn't know immediately that they've slipped back in time. So in this novel, the teenage girl in modern day Pacific Palisades finds herself in 1848 on the Oregon Trail, and she doesn't know it. She's been kind of a hellion, so she knew her parents were going to do something pretty soon, and so she fears that they put her in a tough love situation. It just happened to be reenactors who are on this wagon train that she thinks is going in a circle, until one day she does find out where and when she is, and that's fun. And also to figure out how to do that, and also that situation is clear there for you. In this one, this is Assassin 13. Let me read the blurb I have for that. Most of those are on Audible as well. Assassin 13 is the true story of how a band of World War I veterans, Wyatt Earp, and a female assassin from the 22nd century took on the mob during the final days of silent film Hollywood. Yep, the true story, really. She realized a little quicker, because she was a lot older, that she was in 1927 and not 2131. So that's how you use kind of time slip for that. In time travel and time slip novels, you have to do a lot of research. And so that's where the other part of this comes in. But let me go to, I'll work that in when we do character development for you. With your character, and you all have heard this, so this one I'm probably not telling you anything new, is you have to give that character something they want, something she wants. All these characters that I have are women. This character, time travel, time slip, she wants to get back to her own time, to her own boyfriend, to the boy she thinks she loves. So she meets the love of her life in 1848. This character wants to get back, she's a female assassin, remember, she wants to get back to the 21st century to do in the guy who betrayed her. So that's her, that's what she wants. This is a straight historical novel set in the 1870s. It's a historical novel of the West. This woman was captured by the Northern Cheyenne, this young girl captured by the Northern Cheyenne. She has a daughter from one of the Cheyenne chiefs, and she's rescued, so to speak, and she wants to, her whole sole purpose is to protect her son. So she ends up going back east to the Gilded Age, New York City, and then finally finds her way back out to Montana, right into the middle of the Great Sioux War. So those are things, one of the things you have to do is make sure that you give your character something she wants. Also, next, you need to know your character thoroughly. But I've found that everybody writes differently and learns differently, and but I've found that you learn kind of as you go. Because nobody knows your character fully, I don't think, at the beginning. So when you're giving your character situations, how that character reacts, you kind of develop that character. And pretty soon you get a feel that she's not reacting the way that the character would react. You realize that. And so it's like an onion, not peeling the onion, but putting the layers on the onion. So you're wanting to know your character thoroughly at some point in time. I'm going to eventually lose my voice here. Okay, fiction is clarity. Clarity in writing trumps everything. So it needs to be clarity. Each character is developed out of specific, detailed, vivid, evocative, sensual details. One of the exercises I gave my students in writing is I had passed out these slips of paper. And on each slip of paper was either the number 1 or the number 2. And so all the number 1 people who got all the number 1 papers had to write something about a pet that was fictional. All the people who got number 2 had to write about a pet that was true. And you can tell the difference. And as a fiction writer, what you want to do is write your fiction as if it was with the evocative details of a memoir, because you can tell the difference. You can get the nostalgia out of a memoir that's written well. So that's what you're doing with the clarity of it. And here's one of the most important ways to develop characters when you're writing fiction, and that is to create moments to show your character, who that character is, throughout. So what I'm going to do is read a couple scenes, hopefully showing how the character was created, or how she appeared. This is a girl, she's a teenage girl in Pacific Palisades, the modern era. Okay, she's in classroom. This teacher, she and the teacher don't get along, but then she doesn't get along with anybody anymore. No one responds, but I doubt if she expected anyone to. She begins her Oregon Trail lecture by talking about a recipe for cornbread. The excitement is almost too much. I give a loud groan that causes her to pause a moment before going on. I am proud to be disliked by every teacher in the school, except Mr. Wilson, but Guthrie hates me with special loathing, pointing out my academic and moral shortcomings loudly and frequently, often with a rue the day attached to it. We have come to blows many times, figuratively. I am not going to actually hit an old lady. I do like to make her life miserable, though, whenever I can. So, she's in a classroom. You just can't have her sitting there and listening to a lecture. You have to do something with that. Let me see if I have one more of those. Yeah. They had no schoolmaster because Morgan is the girl. She's about 14 at this time, and she's living on a small ranch in Montana, and this is about 1872. They had no schoolmaster because Morgan had nearly beaten the previous one to death. Just after the new year began, a young Illinois normal school graduate named Jacob Hartnett had stopped in the tiny hamlet of Lone Tree, which consisted of a saloon, a church, a sawmill, and several rough-hewn log cabins with hive doors, and signed on with Pastor Burlow to teach the area's children their 3 R's. To the Valley people, a teacher was welcome. All the O'Connor young attended except for Patrick, as did 20 other children. Morgan hated going because it reduced her hunting time, but her mother insisted. Short and stocky, Hartnett was a dandy, dressed with a department store suit. He bragged of buying at Marshall Fields in Chicago. The stiff collar matched his personality. In a growing ritual, each morning he placed his foot on a stool and had one of the children wipe the dust off his polished shoes. While not paying any attention to the lessons, Morgan still received good grades by using her smile and charm. Each day, about a half hour into the lessons, the need to escape his droning voice became overwhelming, and she would ask to fetch wood outside for the pot-bellied stove. Clearly smitten with her, he always grinned and allowed it. When Hartnett had been in Lone Tree 7 weeks, the incident occurred that ended his stay. Morgan had gone out after wood, and a half hour later, stretching the time as long as she dared, she returned with an armload and saw her brother Connor standing in front of the class, holding out both hands, and Hartnett, his eyes alight with fury, viciously striking them with a stout switch. "You do not tell me, little man, that conjugating verbs ain't going to help you brand a calf," he was screaming. Connor did not move, wincing at each strike, but fiercely standing his ground. One wild blow struck the cheekbone, opening a long, bloody gash. Morgan's temper exploded. The other children that day would swear her eyes shot fire and her hair flew about like writhing snakes, appearing like her namesake Morgan, the mad Irish goddess of strife. "You bloody bastard," she screamed. She hurled cordwood, striking him in the chest, knocking him back against the desk. Squealing in terror, he streaked for the door, bursting out into Lone Tree's single street. The hellish Irish wished after him, hurling her missiles. Running out of ammunition, she snatched up an axe handle, leaning against the sawmill without breaking stride, shouting over and over that she was going to kill him. When he fell, she tried to do just that. In a frenzy, she bludgeoned the man into unconsciousness and kept right on until Pastor Burlow dragged her off. So, I was trying to show that she had a temper.
I guess so. I like that kid already.
And so the Cheyenne attack her ranch. All her family except for her brother carried off, and she is carried off as well. Here's a secret, kind of a secret that I found. Many of you probably know it, but give your main characters something that they're really good at. You know, I don't mean that they're the fastest typer in the world, but something exceptional. A couple people you're probably aware of. Elizabeth Salander, what's she good at? But how soon they forget. Elizabeth Salander is the girl with the dragon tattoo, and she was one of the greatest hackers in the world. And boy, was she kind of bonkers. Such a fascinating character. And of course, drawing a blank here, Katniss Everdeen. What was she really good at?
Archery.
Archery, yeah, exactly. Assassin 13, the character in here, 12, grows up in an post-apocalyptic world in the 22nd century. And she's with a traveling circus. And in that traveling circus, her parents have an octagon, and they challenge all comers. And at 12, she challenges the teenage kids, and she is so well trained. And of course, when they are killed, she goes on, and eventually she becomes an assassin. And then stumbles back into 1927. So she is what is called an Assassin 13. That's the highest level, sort of a one-in-a-century type talent. This girl, what talent does she have? What is she so good at? Well, and why is she such a hellion, so to speak? She was on the Junior Olympic riding team. She was just a gifted horsewoman. And then she got a little bit of hubris, and she challenged this other kid, and her horse, the horse that she loved, had to be put down because she pushed him too hard. And so she really knew horses well. What's going to come in really handy when you're out west and you're being chased by Sioux Indians or something. And at one time she's being chased by Indians, and she has a horse she trained, and she's able to leap over a great barrier that blocks the three Indians, and she comes up onto a hillside. Indians are over here. She has escaped. If you read the book, you'll see what happens there. And this girl, what is she so good at? You know, this is what research does for you. Who can remember a young woman when she was 14, actual woman in history, who fed her family and was able to keep her family fed by hunting, and eventually started challenging men to sharpshooting contests?
Annie Oakley.
Annie Oakley. Yeah. So this girl was kind of like Annie Oakley. She kept her the larder filled with meat. And so she was the hunter, and she really was a good shot. So those are three of the things that, a couple of the things that are important to know. Another thing is to give your character an attitude. Like I mentioned, Elizabeth Salander probably has more of an attitude than any character that I've come across almost in fiction. At least any character that is the protagonist in fiction. Katniss Everdeen has an attitude. She's not kind of the loving, compassionate character that some people might think. She's really got an attitude, like I said. And that's what I try to give to all these characters, so they're kind of memorable of them. Another thing that helps your character, builds interest in your character and gives you more scenes to write about, is give them a conflicted past, kind of a psychic wound, a wound that they're carrying around. The example I will give is the novel that I'm working on now that I'm almost finished with. And I've had a lot of people look at that because I go to critique groups, and I have every chapter critiqued by a bunch of people. And right now, it looks good. I don't usually pat myself on the back or anything. It really looks good. It's a novel about the Holocaust. It's a World War II novel. And this girl is living in a shtetl in what is now Lithuania, and I'm not sure how familiar you are with what happened in Eastern Europe in 1941 after Operation Barbarossa. But this was before the gas chambers, and so what the Nazis did is they had these murder squads, Einsatzgruppen, and so her name is Rivka Resnick. The entire village, a shtetl is a Jewish village. In other words, it's mainly Jewish. It's not a Jewish minority, it's a Jewish majority. All these little towns are wiped out, all of them. So there are about 300,000 were murdered. And she escapes, and several of them did. So I did a heck of a lot of research on this. So she escapes. You got I don't want to ruin your dinner, your lunch here. The pit was a couple thousand people in the pit. And they're the last one. She's with her mother, her grandmother, her sister. And nobody's going to survive this, except right before the next wave of bullets, the mother turns, shoves her into the pit just before the attack. oh, this isn't the first time, this probably happened 10, 15 times in this whole area, how people in the Ukraine and in Lithuania and Poland, how people escape. But, you know, 10 or 15 out of 300,000, that's not a lot. Anyway, that's how she throws dirt on the grave and she punches up through the dirt and escapes. Now, she's carrying a heck of a psychic wound. Every time she's in a scene with other people, that is kind of creating conflict as you go along. So whatever that psychic wound is, doesn't that be huge? Doesn't that be something like that? And probably the last thing I will do here, while I see if anybody has any questions, is this is the scene where Paul Masters goes back from modern day Pacific Palisades into Midwest in 1848. She's at a party. She doesn't want to go to this party, but her parents have grounded her because she did something at school that was so outrageous that they had no choice to ground her. But her mother's a first-class lawyer, so instead of expelling her, she got her daughter only suspended. But she has to stay at this family little party at Friday evening, and she doesn't want to be there. And she's off by herself in the background, and then part of the lawn and so on. And so it's kind of her birthday too, her 16th birthday. I figure I might as well get this over with. Mom will not let it go till I do my family duty. Grimly, I put my smiley face on and start toward them. But as I do, they seem to drift farther away. Suddenly cannons blast inside my head, and I shriek from the pain. She's been getting these headaches all week, and once during the week, she suddenly appeared in a field with 3 Sioux Indians facing her, and then she's back into the locker room. So grimly, I put my smiley face on and start toward them, but as I do, they seem to drift farther away. Suddenly, cannons blast toward my inside my head, and I shriek from the pain. My stomach floods with acid. I bend double, hands on my knees, and hurl a gush of bitter yellow liquid splashing onto the grass. I am afraid. What is happening to me? Looking up, I see my relatives spinning in a kaleidoscope of heads and flailing arms rushing toward me. I fall to one knee. One last look at them and the terror on my mother's face. Then a black curtain comes down and I am gone. I float in another world, spiraling down a black hole. I hear the words, "Come, finish the journey. Finish the journey." Only a few seconds pass by the time I open my eyes and see everyone gathered over me. "Libby, Libby, my God, your arm is busted all to pieces," a man shouts. It feels like someone is banging my arm with a hammer. The pain is excruciating. I stare up at them. Something is very wrong. I don't know any of them. Mom, Uncle Dave, Aunt Charlotte aren't there. These people are strangers. Many of the men have beards, and several women with sunbonnets. Sunbonnets? I sit up screaming at the searing pain in my arm. I look at them, tears welling in my eyes. Who are you people? Anyway, that's it. So does anybody have any questions? You probably know as much as I do. Yes, ma'am.
This is a little different, but at the beginning you were talking about ACX, Amazon, you can tape your own book. And then you were saying be sure you're not eating or you breathe right and all that kind of stuff.
Say it again?
Well, you were saying be sure you're not eating while you're taping or
Yes.
or something like that.
Breathing.
Yeah, and what I was wondering is when you're done taping your book, do they allow you to listen to it again to make corrections? Can you
Sure.
use it over and over to make sure it's perfect before you?
Sure, you'd have to go on ACX first
Uh-huh.
to find out what their standards are. Then you go to the studio you have and you do the book, you record it. And so you'd probably want to learn how to do that. As a sound person, I would have no idea how to do that. My books are on Audible, but I didn't do those books. The company that I worked with did it. But probably it's easier, unless you're kind of an actress, it's easier to do nonfiction, because you can, if you have a decent enough voice and you can modulate your voice, instead of talking in monotone, you'll do all right with it. And you just make sure you meet those standards. And what I mean by breathing, it's not a, I don't want you to hold your breath all the time, but it's not a little thing, because most amateur people doing their own recordings will go after every word, and that comes right over you hear it. So I heard someone do, an outstanding writer did, what's the novel that John Wayne did the movie of, and then Jeff Bridges did the other movie?
Oh, True Grit.
True Grit, yeah. The book True Grit was a great book. And so this woman author did the book itself, and she was very good as an audible. But you could hear her breathing all the time, which was really distracting. But still, it was a good book. Good book to find. And incidentally, I haven't read a book in probably 6-7 years. That's all I can say. I listen to them all. I listen to probably 70 novels a year. And it's very easy to do it. Driving back to Sandpoint, I'll probably get 2 hours at least in. So, any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
So, I had a professor friend who said that short stories should always have a symbol or symbolism. Do longer stories, how often?
Well, that's like one of those things I was talking about earlier. When you have a large book and there are 500 things you're supposed to do in the book, I don't think thinking about that is really that important. You have things, you develop things, and if you're doing it right and creating as vivid images, whether it be sense of smell, sense of sight, and things start reappearing, then you can kind of make a symbol out of it. I wouldn't force a symbol on anything. And to say, I'm not going to say this person is a good teacher and this person's not a good teacher. If anybody says you have to have something, is probably wrong. You don't have to have that. Unless,
Well, he insisted in his class that if you wanted to get a good grade, write in his paper and put a symbol
better put a symbol
in the short story.
Anybody else have any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Are you still teaching writing classes?
Me? No, I haven't been teaching for 11 years. There's I can't remember her name now either, but she writes a lot of big books on FBI and a lot of, no, not the FBI, but she's an American that writes big books, mystery books from these two British Scotland Yard people. Anyway, Elizabeth George, that's her name. She used to be an English teacher. She said, you cannot write and teach English. You just can't do it because there's only so much your brain can commit to, so you have to, those are two things you have to commit 100% to. So either, like Stephen King, he was an English teacher, He said, "The heck with the kids, I'm writing my book." You know? And he even has admitted that. But Elizabeth George, she didn't. And I couldn't do it either. Anything else? Yes, ma'am.
So how long do you research a book, and how do you research it? Do you, like for this newer book, were you able to meet with any people in particular, or do you have a timeline?
Yeah, I've talked to a couple of people. I have a friend who grew up in Brooklyn. He's Jewish, and he's about in his late 80s. He's still real sharp. His name is Ken Fishman. And I've talked to him a lot because the book goes from her life in Nashua, the city, the small town in kind of Lithuania, into working with the partisans, and then back to Brooklyn. And throughout the whole story, the person who led these SASP group and these murder squads, his name is Max Bauer in the novel. She runs into him again at Auschwitz. She's at Auschwitz for several months. And finally, when she escapes with some other people, I won't go into the whole story, but she ends up back in Brooklyn. In Brooklyn, she'd never been there before, but she gets to America to Brooklyn. And so I need to know about Brooklyn. I mean, I've never been to Brooklyn, which I never have, and I don't know about Brooklyn 2020, let alone 1945. So you have to do research. You have to get the houses right, you have to get the cars right, the streets right, the kids playing stickball, the girls on the sidewalk jumping rope. In Brooklyn at this time, people sat on the stoops. They came outside. And I guess that's kind of like what we did before air conditioning. In the summers, we were outside all the time. So I just research all the time, but I don't buy a book and read that book ahead of time to research. I'll see what I need, and then I'll research until I get what I need. And I have a degree in history, and I read history all my life, so I know pretty much the basis, the generalities of all this stuff, so I know what the research is. But you just have to. How many people here are historical novel readers? How many people love historical novels? Well, then you know that you don't want to read a book where George Washington is high-fiving one of his commanders. But he didn't high-five that. So you just research, and that's another point I wanted to make. Is that, for instance, one of the chapters is about one of the male characters in the 82nd Airborne in Berlin after World War II in August 1945. So when you do the research, and you get all that research, what you have is a chapter that's almost written itself. Now you say what's going to happen, but you're writing about all the rubble women, the women who are passing the rubble back from bucket to bucket along these lines of snakes, or snake-like lines, and they're paid a little bit. And you're talking about how the Russians were just barbaric and turned Berlin into rape city, literally. And the U.S. Army at that time said, no matter what the Russian soldiers are doing, they're our allies, and you cannot do anything if you're an American soldier about it until, and if you do, you get court-martialed. And so there's a scene right there, because you're going to set something up where your people are going to do something about it. So that's why research is so important. And it's not just historical novels. If you're writing something nowadays, if you want your character to have been in prison, how many people here have been in prison? I don't think. So you research what's that's like. I mean, research, write what you know. Well, research it. I've never flown a spaceship, but you research it. Star Trek. Yes, sir.
I find research is fascinating as writing. In fact, I do a lot of research.
Yeah.
That's not my question. My question is, does Sandpoint have something similar to this group?
I
have a summer
belong to
place
the
up around
Idaho Writers League there.
I'm sorry?
The Idaho Writers League,
They're there.
and that's the Sandpoint chapter, and we're the largest group. We're 35, and my guess is this is the largest group of that. But we're the largest in Idaho, so.
When do you meet?
We meet every other Saturday, first and third Saturdays of every month. And then we have critique groups Tuesday at 4 o'clock, which all you're doing is critiquing. We do the critiquing also at the meetings as well. So you submit something and people will critique it. Do you all do critique groups here? Or?
Not in this group.
Not as part of this,
Say it again?
not as part of this organization, but a lot of us go to critique groups around.
So that's the point. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, when you were talking about time travel and time slip, do you have any time travel in any of your books?
All my two books here are time slip.
Okay.
But I found it's probably better if you write a time slip novel to call it time travel. Because for the general public, they understand a time travel, but time slip might throw them off.
Yeah,
But
so,
the Historical Novel Society has a category for time slip novels. And it's the same requirements as being a historical novelist. You still have to get the history right.
right. So I was just wondering if you use the same theory of how it happens in both your stories and,
No, because there's so much stuff about, mythology, not mythology, but, this has grown up around time travel in writing and so on, the grandfather clause and all this other kind of stuff. And we don't know what that would be, or even that some people will say theoretically time travel is possible, and then others say it's not possible. But that's why time slip is easier, you can just like Claire putting her hands on the stones, and all of a sudden she's in Scotland in 1848 or whatever it is. And it's done, you don't have to
explain.
create a machine.
Yeah.
We have an interesting critique group coming up in April that I'm going to be a part of. And anyone who wants to be a part of it, just let me know. We're going on a Norwegian cruise line across the Atlantic. We're going to do a critique group throughout the whole thing. Then we're going to Ireland and into Le Havre and Normandy and a whole bunch of other places. So that's going to be our next critique group. Thank everybody. I mean, this looks a really interesting group. It's always good to talk about it.
What does your t-shirt say?
I'm sorry?
Your t-shirt, what
A
does it say?
t-shirt? As a teacher, former teacher, I can say that.
There's a lot of truth in that. There's a lot of truth there.
So too.